Welcome to Grosse Point Congregational Church for our Sunday worship. We're glad to have you with us. Enjoy our sermon this morning. Following the message, you'll find a link to give to our church, as well as a web link so you can visit our church website for upcoming future church events. Many of our events are done over Zoom. We hope that you'll be able to attend any or all of our scheduled activities. God's blessings be with you. Enjoy our message from Sunday morning. Once considered the center of the world, the ancient temple of Apollo at Delphi in Greece had inscribed on a column at the entrance these three maxims: know thyself, nothing in excess, and surety brings ruin. The 6th century BC temple was dedicated to the acclamated wisdom of the Greeks and was later stolen by the Romans. Inside the temple were inscribed 144 additional proverbs, which gave guidance so a person could have a happy and productive life. Wise sayings like respect the gods, control your temper, pursue honor, praise the good, be grateful, and pursue harmony. Reviewing the 147 proverbs inscribed on the walls and columns, there's one theme or one word that does not appear: humility. The Greeks and Romans did not consider humility a virtue, either in politics, culture, or religion. Humility in the ancient world was humiliating and was despised. The philosopher Aristotle believed there was no room in life for humility, teaching that one should reflect upon the importance of honor and fantasize about your reputation. These notions should fill our thoughts and shape our steps, he said. The ancient world was built on praise, even to the extent they believed the more you achieve, the more you should be praised. There was one kind of humility, though, that was acceptable: humility before the gods. But, that's essentially a no-brainer because the gods, in their opinion, could kill you as they really weren't on your side and they had a lot more power than humanity. This also held true when one stood before kings or emperors or Caesars, as they had a lot more power. As the Roman Empire extended its ruling power throughout Palestine and Asia Minor, they spread their ideas about humility as well, and their view about humility being a shameful trait made its way into the Hebrew world. Adopting the ideas that honor was prized above all else, and praise for individuals spread from lesser to greater. Thus, a new frame of mind emerged among the Hebrews that one never exercised humility before someone deemed an equal or lower on the social pecking order. Granted, this was not accepted by everyone, especially the prophets like Isaiah, who offered an alternative theology, one that claimed the one God's special concern was for the crushed and humiliated, and for those who have been humbled or brought low by oppression. Isaiah addressed God's suffering servant who was humbled, crushed, and bruised. Later, the sage and writer Yeshua ben Sira instructed his students in the 2nd century BC to humble their heads, incline their ears to the poor, and return their greeting in humility. Though very few adopted this idea, there was a striking blow against him when his grandson, who earned his fame for translating the Hebrew scriptures and letters into the Greek, was ashamed of these teachings about humility. And when he ran into the prophet Isaiah's instructions to be humble, he found these teachings problematic, so he changed Isaiah's words and use of the word humility to the word gentleness. By the time Jesus was born, we discover a slight shift regarding how the Hebrews viewed humility. And there seems to be a general acceptance about Jesus' teachings about humility among the crowds who gathered to listen to him teach. Even Nicodemus, though fearful to be seen with Jesus, still is said to have admired Jesus' teachings about humility. Jesus declared to the crowds in his sermons, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." In Luke, Jesus declared, all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Jesus also demonstrated his humility when he rode into Jerusalem seated on a donkey instead of on a horse. Arriving on a donkey indicated that Jesus arrived humbly and in peace. Later this week, in an upper room, Jesus once again will illustrate his humility as he humbled himself before his disciples and washed their feet. When Jesus took the position of a servant, lowering himself before his disciples, this was the very reason they were aghast at his actions and begged him to stop. He was humbling himself before his students. And even if his disciples had already begun to question or challenge their preconceived notions and ideas regarding hierarchy and humility, Jesus then shoved his disciples' mentality and perspective into a new religious and social territory by bending down to his knees, taking their filthy feet into his hands and washing them. Demonstrating humility at its finest, Jesus taught that the life of his followers would be a lifetime of service as they became servants of others. This was one of those upside down kingdom teachings Jesus famously delivered. Similar upside down kingdom teachings are found in Matthew's section named the Beatitudes, which is a section described by scholars as the best word portrait of a servant ever recorded. Jesus had delivered this list while standing on a hill next to the Sea of Galilee, or as generally accepted, on a hill outside Peter's hometown where a church stands today in Israel. And Jesus described a servant saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who have been persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is in heaven, and it is great. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." It is believed that since Matthew recorded these words as a litany of humility, and they survived intact, it is likely the early church and those who were responsible for writing hymns and creeds had adopted humility as a sign of Christian living instead of weakness. Clearly, when Paul wrote to the churches later in his life, he expressed his admiration for the humility they expressed to fellow believers in Christ when they visited the congregation. And for their humility, they openly displayed to strangers and guests, giving them the best seats, the best food, and the best places. In his letter to the Philippian congregation, Paul repeats the lyrics of a hymn or the words of a creed that was popular in the early church known as the Song of Christ. Paul used the words to deliver his hopes for the church in Philippi that they would take to heart and recall Jesus' humility when they conduct church business or present themselves to the world. Utilizing the hymn, Paul writes, Jesus emptied himself by taking the form of a slave, being born in human likeness, and humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. Paul encouraged the congregation to recall their roots in Jesus' humility in their conversations and interactions with each other. Paul was concerned that some of the leaders of the congregation were leaning toward the persistent and popular Roman view that rewarded and even praised or glorified arrogant and proud people. Paul warned the congregation that they needed to be humble and humbly look to the interests of others and view those interests as their own interests. He highlighted their need to be compassionate and caring persons who viewed anyone being oppressed as their own oppression and another person's suffering as their own suffering. In doing this, Paul defines the story of Jesus' suffering and passion as a moment of humility, which everyone who professes Christ should seek to imitate. Describing the next 5 days of what we refer to as Holy Week, Paul ends his lesson about humility with the state-sponsored murder of Jesus. Paul uses this description to remind the congregation that Jesus emptied himself of his deity to be a servant to everyone. This way, he could establish a template for his followers so we would choose to be self-emptying as well. Paul offers an intriguing description as he states, Jesus who turned water to wine, walked on water, healed the blind, caused the lame to leap. He laid aside his superpower to feel our experience and feel our pain. Jesus stepped into our humanness so he could relate with us, sharing our heartache, temptations, disappointment, and sorrow. He tasted death. He experienced joy. He saw with human eyes the joy persons have as they leave their homes and met with him in the street for this unique parade. Still, even when Jesus could have experienced human pride and arrogance, Jesus chose humility. Jesus chose not to be humble before those who are higher or better or richer. He chose to be humble before those who are lower and poorer. Jesus showed loving care and support and sympathy toward humanity, which challenged the status quo of the Roman Empire and of the ruling class elites in Israel. Jesus took on the form of a servant and encouraged his followers to do the same. To be sure, this form of humility does not seek low self-esteem, nor ask us to despise ourselves. Rather, as one pastor wrote, Jesus wanted us to focus on others, not ourselves. Teaching his disciples about humility and pressing them to expand their ideas, he introduces a fascinating idea saying, no one has greater love than this, than to lay one's life down for another, even a total stranger. This is selfless love and the ultimate sacrifice. You know, truthfully, this was completely bonkers and completely opposite of any Roman or Greek teaching before it. Jesus called on his disciples to be willing to make the ultimate sacrifice as a servant. Thankfully, this incredible message of servant humility has survived through the centuries, and it was even evident last Sunday when I had the honor of blessing 20 individuals from the Grosse Points as they make their way to Poland to help with Ukrainian refugees. They'll be staying 30 miles from where Russian missiles have been striking targets. And speaking with the volunteers before the service, they said they know the risks involved and they desire to assist in that disastrous situation. And they understand they may have to stand between Russian guns and Ukrainian children. Yet the common theme heard last Sunday was humility and a willingness to be a servant, even to strangers in a foreign land. They are responding to Jesus' call for his followers to be peacemakers and servants. And they recognize this could mean they must sacrifice their lives in the name of peace and love. Humbly, they recognize Jesus' teachings while also acknowledging that Jesus' teachings and model of humility led the world to despise and hate him. The world responded to Jesus' love for the world with disgust and hostility. Arrogant and proud persons were furious that Jesus would dare say that in order for us to receive the kingdom of God, we must lower ourselves to care for others below us. The powers to be hated that Jesus introduced the concept of an upside-down kingdom. Persons who loved to boast of their works and love the praise and honor they were shown by persons they deemed lower, poorer, and less powerful than themselves, did not want their status turned upside down. So they began to conspire among themselves and with court officials and with lawyers and the scribes at the temple to look for a way or ways to trap Jesus with his words so they could discredit him before the crowds. They sought a way to kill him. And as we enter this week, the humble self-emptying Jesus, who was humble and filled with goodness, is about to face bigotry and hatred head on. And he's about to suffer because he was a slave to all. A grave shadow has begun to fall on the land as the parade in Jerusalem fades in the minds of the crowd. And hatred, pride, arrogance, and evil has begun to rise up to power this week. And Jesus' prediction is about to take shape. His humility will be tested to the point of death, even death on a cross. Filled of humility, Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a colt, the foal of a donkey. He did this to declare his entrance as rooted in peace. This morning, we celebrate and we're grateful for his message of peace, and we seek to follow his example.